The DNA test proved he was the father. He smiled like he'd won something. And I felt calm. That's the part people don't understand. They expect rage, tears, screaming. But when the envelope opened and he exhaled in relief, all I felt was stillness. Like something heavy had finally settled into place. If you're listening to this, you might already be judging me. Or maybe you're confused. Maybe you're wondering what kind of woman agrees to a DNA test without a fight. What kind of wife watches her husband doubt her fidelity and doesn't flinch. Just stay with me for a moment. I promise this will make sense. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the results came in. I remember that because Tuesdays were always quiet in our house. The kids were at school. The sunlight hit the kitchen table at an angle that made dust visible in the air. Ordinary. Almost gentle. My husband stood across from me, holding the envelope like it weighed more than it should. 8 years of marriage, compressed into a thin white fold. He didn't look at me when he opened it. He looked down, like he was afraid the paper might accuse him of something. I watched his hands instead of his face. They were steady. Too steady. When he read the result, his shoulders loosened. His mouth curved into a smile, not wide, but satisfied. Vindicated. Like a man who'd been holding his breath and finally got proof he was right to doubt. That smile told me everything I needed to know. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't ask what it said. I already knew. Of course our son was his. I'd never betrayed him. Not once. The test wasn't about truth, it was about permission. Permission to question me. Permission to rewrite our history. So when he looked up, still smiling, still relieved, I met his eyes and said the only thing that mattered. Now test our daughter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I just stated it. The silence that followed was louder than any argument we'd ever had. You might think this story is about revenge. It isn't. You might think it's about proving a point. It's not even that. This is a story about what happens when trust is treated like a luxury instead of a foundation. About what happens when someone you love decides certainty matters more than respect. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back, before the envelope, before the test, before that smile. Back to when I still believed that love, once chosen, stayed chosen. My name is Emily Parker. I was 21 when I met my husband, 22 when I married him, and somewhere between then and now, I learned how quietly a life can fracture. At the time, I thought I knew exactly who I was married to. I thought I knew myself, too. We lived in a modest house in a neighborhood where nothing dramatic ever happened. 2 cars in the driveway. Shoes by the door. Finger-painted artwork on the fridge. The kind of life people describe as settled, as if that means safe. On the surface, it was. We had routines. Shared jokes. Inside references no one else would understand. He kissed me goodbye every morning. He texted when he'd be late. He showed up for birthdays and school events. From the outside, we looked solid. And for a long time, I believed we were. That's why, when the doubt finally surfaced, it didn't arrive like a storm. It came like a hairline crack, thin, almost invisible. Easy to ignore if you didn't look too closely. I didn't know yet what that crack would become. I didn't know how much weight it could carry before everything split open. But I do now. And if you're still listening, it's because some part of you knows this story isn't really about DNA at all. It's about the moment you realize the person across from you has already decided who you are, without asking. In the next part, I'll tell you what our life looked like before that decision was made. Before suspicion replaced certainty. Before love started keeping score. And maybe, as you listen, you'll recognize something familiar. Before any of this happened, my life felt finished. Not in a bleak way. In a settled way. Like I'd reached the chapter people spend their 20s chasing. We met young. Too young, some people said. I was 21, still learning how to pay bills on time, still calling my mother when I couldn't get a stain out of a shirt. He was older than me by a few years, already working full-time, already certain about who he was. That certainty felt like safety. I leaned into it without realizing how much of myself I was handing over. We built our life quickly, but not recklessly. A small wedding. Nothing extravagant. Just family, close friends, and promises we believed would hold because we meant them. I remember standing there thinking, this is it. This is the hardest choice I'll ever have to make, and I've already made it. Marriage didn't change us overnight. It softened us, rounded the edges. We learned each other's rhythms. He liked the house quiet in the mornings. I liked music while I cooked. He folded towels a specific way. I never bothered correcting him when he did the laundry wrong. These were the negotiations of a shared life, and I thought we were good at them. When our son was born, everything narrowed. Priorities, time, energy, all of it funneled into this tiny person who depended on us completely. He cried, I panicked, my husband steadied me. We took turns being strong. That mattered to me. I noticed it. I stored it away as proof. Our daughter came 2 years later. Different baby. Different energy. Where our son was calm, she was fierce. Where he slept, she resisted. My husband joked that she was all me. I laughed. I didn't hear anything underneath that joke back then. Life settled into repetition. School drop-offs. Packed lunches. Evening baths. Weekends filled with errands and birthday parties and obligations we didn't question because this was what families did. We argued, of course. About money. About time. About who was more tired. But nothing felt dangerous. Nothing felt like it could undo us. I trusted him. Completely. Not in a naive way. I knew marriage took work. I knew people changed. But I trusted his intentions. I trusted that if something was wrong, he would tell me. I trusted that love meant giving the benefit of the doubt, not hoarding it. Looking back, I can see how young I was. How eager I was to believe stability meant permanence. I'd grown up learning to adapt quickly, to read rooms, to keep things smooth. That skill made me a good partner. It also made me good at overlooking discomfort. There were signs. Not obvious ones. Small shifts. A pause before answering certain questions. A distracted look when our daughter talked too much at dinner. Moments I brushed past because they didn't fit the story I was telling myself. He started spending more time on his phone. Not secretive, just absorbed. He laughed at things I didn't hear. When I asked what was funny, he'd say, nothing, too quickly, like the word had been rehearsed. Sometimes, when I handed him our daughter, he'd hesitate. Not refuse. Just adjust his grip. Like he was holding something fragile but unfamiliar. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was overthinking. That marriage wasn't a microscope. That love didn't require constant analysis. I reminded myself how tired we both were. How stress could change people temporarily. Because that's the thing about stability, it can make you complacent. It convinces you that whatever cracks appear will stay small. Now let me ask you something before I go further. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something was off, but you ignored it because you didn't want to believe it? Tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone in this. There was one moment I replay often. A quiet one. Easy to miss. We were sitting on the couch, the kids asleep, the television on but muted. I leaned my head against his shoulder. He stiffened. Just for a second. Then relaxed. I remember thinking, that was strange. And then I let it go. That's what life looked like before everything broke. Not perfect. Not dramatic. Just familiar. Comfortable enough that I didn't question the foundation. I didn't know yet that he already was. The first real doubt didn't come with an accusation. It came disguised as curiosity. We were cleaning up after dinner. Plates stacked. Water running. One of those quiet, shy moments that used to make me feel close to him. He was leaning against the counter, watching me rinse a glass, when he asked, almost casually, "Do you think our kids look like us?" It wasn't an unusual question. Parents talk about that all the time. I smiled and said something automatic, something light. Of course. Our son has your eyes. Our daughter has my mouth. He didn't respond right away. I turned, expecting a joke, but his expression had changed. Not angry. Not suspicious. Thoughtful. Like he was filing something away instead of sharing it. Yeah, he said finally. I guess. That was it. The moment passed. But something in me tightened. After that, the questions kept coming, spaced out just enough to seem harmless. Who did our daughter take after? Did I remember what I was doing around the time she was conceived? Had I ever wondered about genetic testing, just for fun? Each question landed softly. None of them accused me of anything. But together, they formed a shape I couldn't unsee. I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before. Not spying. Not searching. Just noticing. The way he watched our daughter when she laughed. The way his face didn't quite mirror the warmth he gave our son. The way he corrected her more, touched her less. I told myself there were explanations. Stress. Work. Personality differences. But my instincts had woken up, and once that happens, it's hard to put them back to sleep. One night, after the kids were in bed, I asked him directly if something was bothering him. I kept my voice even. Inviting. I gave him space to step into honesty. He said no too quickly. Then he smiled. Too wide. You worry too much. That sentence settled somewhere deep in my chest. Not because it was cruel, but because it was familiar. I'd heard it before. From people who wanted me to stop asking questions, not because the questions were wrong, but because they were inconvenient. I didn't push. Not yet. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. A few days later, I overheard him on the phone. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was walking past the hallway when I heard my name. That tends to stop you. He lowered his voice when he realized I was nearby, but not before I caught fragments. Probably just paranoia. Yeah, I know, still, you never know. I stood there longer than I should have. Long enough for my stomach to sink. Long enough to feel something shift from unease into certainty. He was doubting me. Not hypothetically. Not abstractly. He was actively entertaining the idea that our daughter might not be his. I didn't confront him. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed clarity. Accusations made in emotion are easy to dismiss. Truth, revealed patiently, is harder to escape. That night, I lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling. I replayed every year of our marriage, not searching for guilt, but for context. I found none. I'd been faithful. Devoted. Predictable, even. Which made his doubt feel heavier. This wasn't about evidence. It was about fear. About something in him that needed reassurance at my expense. The next day, I noticed something small but definitive. Our daughter ran to him after school, arms open, excited to tell him something trivial. He smiled, but he didn't kneel. He didn't meet her at her level. He let her words spill out into the space between them, untouched. I felt it then. The shift from suspicion to harm. Whatever he was thinking, it was already changing how he treated her. And that was the moment I knew this couldn't stay unspoken. Pause for a second. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted him right then, or waited and watched? Drop your answer below. I really want to know. I waited. Not because I was passive. But because I was preparing myself for a truth I didn't yet have words for. I didn't know how he would say it. I didn't know when. I only knew that once he did, nothing between us would ever be neutral again. And I was right. He didn't accuse me all at once. He let the idea leak out slowly, like it would hurt less that way. It started with distance. Emotional first, then physical. Conversations became functional. Logistics. Schedules. Who was picking up which child and when? The warmth didn't disappear, it thinned. Like a blanket pulled too tight to cover everything. I tried once more to open the door. I asked him if he was unhappy. If he felt disconnected. If there was something he needed to say but didn't know how. I gave him every possible exit ramp that didn't involve blaming me. He took none of them. Instead, he asked me if I'd ever lied to protect someone I loved. I remember the exact moment he said it. We were sitting at the kitchen table. The same table where the DNA envelope would eventually land. I looked at him and asked what he meant. He shrugged. Just a question. But his eyes didn't leave my face. He was studying me. Measuring my reaction. That's when it hit me, he wasn't looking for truth. He was looking for tells. I answered honestly. I don't think love survives lies. He nodded, like I'd just confirmed something for him. A week later, he said the words out loud. Carefully. Like he'd practiced. I think we should get a DNA test. Not we. Not the kids. Just enough distance in the sentence to make it sound reasonable. Objective. Scientific. For our son, he added quickly. Just to put my mind at ease. I didn't respond right away. I waited. Let the silence stretch. I wanted to hear what else he'd say. He filled the space with explanations. Statistics. Stories he'd read. Men who raised children that weren't theirs. He framed it as caution. As responsibility. As something logical men did when they needed certainty. He never once asked how it made me feel. I agreed. Immediately. That surprised him. I saw it in his face, the flicker of relief, followed by something else. Discomfort, maybe. Or disappointment that I didn't fight. The test was scheduled. The days leading up to it were unbearable in their normalcy. Breakfasts. Homework. Bedtime stories. All of it happening while something corrosive sat between us, unacknowledged. I watched him with our son. The affection hadn't changed. If anything, it intensified. More laughs. More attention. More pride. Like he was already preparing for a confirmation he expected. With our daughter, it was different. He wasn't cruel. Just distant. And children feel that. She became quieter around him. More cautious. She stopped asking him to read to her at night. That's when the betrayal stopped being abstract. I need you to understand, this wasn't just betrayal. This was my whole life collapsing. Have you ever been blindsided like this? If you've been there, share your story below. We heal better together. The test was done quickly. A swab. A signature. Nothing dramatic. The envelope would arrive in a week. During that week, he was almost kind. Polite. Hopeful. Like a man waiting for absolution. I wasn't waiting for the result. I already knew it. What I was waiting for was confirmation of something else. Whether he would question himself. Whether doubt would make him reflect. Whether he'd see what this process had already cost us. He didn't. When the envelope arrived, he brought it into the kitchen and placed it on the table between us. Like evidence. Like a verdict. He opened it slowly. Read it silently. Smiled. That smile was the lowest point. Not because of what it meant, but because of what it revealed. He'd needed to believe I was capable of betrayal. Needed it enough to risk everything we'd built. And when he got the answer he wanted, he didn't apologize. He didn't look ashamed. He looked relieved. Vindicated. That's when I understood the full truth. The test wasn't the betrayal. The doubt was. And once doubt like that takes root, it doesn't disappear just because science says you were wrong. It just finds a new place to grow. After he smiled, after the air settled back into the kitchen like nothing irreversible had just happened, I felt something inside me go very still. Not numb. Not broken. Focused. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't demand an apology he wasn't offering. I watched him fold the paper back into the envelope, careful, almost reverent, like it was proof of his righteousness. He started to speak. I don't remember the words. They didn't matter. What mattered was the clarity forming in me, sharp and undeniable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't insecurity. This was a choice. He had chosen suspicion over trust. Control over partnership. Certainty over respect. And he had done it quietly enough that he could pretend he was being reasonable. I realized then that nothing I said in that moment would reach him. He was still riding the relief of being right about something, anything. So I stayed quiet. That silence was my first act of control. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the living room and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. Not rage. Grief. The kind that arrives when you realize the future you planned is no longer available. I thought about our daughter. About the way his doubt had already reshaped how he saw her. About what it would mean for her to grow up feeling slightly outside his certainty. That was the line. I wouldn't let her inherit his doubt. So I planned. Not dramatically. Methodically. I gathered information. About genetic testing. About family law. About what questions mattered and which ones didn't. I made appointments. Quiet ones. I documented changes in behavior, not to punish, but to protect. I also watched him closely. How he spoke now. How he moved through the house. The confidence he'd regained. He believed the matter was settled. That belief was his mistake. I reflected too. On my own role. On how easily I'd handed over my trust. On how often I'd smoothed things over instead of insisting on clarity. I didn't blame myself, but I learned. There's a difference between peace and silence. I'd chosen silence too often. By the time I spoke again, my voice was steady. We were back at the kitchen table. The envelope still there. I let my fingers rest on it before I looked at him. Now test our daughter, I said. No anger. No accusation. Just balance. He laughed at first. A short, dismissive sound. That's not necessary. I met his eyes. It is. That was the moment the power shifted. He felt it. I could see it. The relief drained out of him, replaced by uncertainty. He asked why. I didn't justify myself. I didn't explain my pain. I didn't remind him of my loyalty. I simply said, because doubt doesn't get to pick favorites. Here's where I made my choice. Do you believe in revenge, or in walking away? When someone destroys your trust, what's the right move? Comment below. I want both sides. This wasn't revenge. It was accountability. If he needed proof to love, then proof would apply equally. If biology was his standard, then it would be universal. And if he refused, if he suddenly believed trust should replace testing, that contradiction would speak louder than anything I could say. I didn't know yet how he'd respond. I only knew I wouldn't back down. For the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. He didn't answer right away. He stared at me like I'd spoken a language he didn't understand. His mouth opened, closed. He looked at the envelope again, then back at me, like it might explain me. That's different, he said. No, I replied. One word. Calm. Final. He stood up. Started pacing. Fast. Short steps. His hands went through his hair the way they did when he felt cornered. She looks like you, he said. That doesn't mean anything. I nodded. Exactly. The room felt smaller. Every sound sharper. The hum of the refrigerator. The clock on the wall. His breathing. He tried logic. Then humor. Then irritation. He said the test would confuse things. That it would hurt her someday. That it was unnecessary stress. I didn't argue. I just watched. Because everything he said now was something he hadn't considered when it was about our son. Or about me. This is the moment everything changed. Be honest, are you rooting for me right now, or do you think I went too far? Tell me in the comments. I can take it. He stopped pacing. Looked at me with something close to fear. You're doing this to make a point, he said. Yes. The word landed between us. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't about genetics. It was about the damage his doubt had already done, and his refusal to see it. He asked me if I was saying our daughter wasn't his. I'm saying, I replied, that if certainty is the price of love, then everyone pays it. Silence. He sat back down slowly. The confidence he'd been wearing all week slid off him. In its place was something raw. Exposed. What if it comes back, different? He asked. That was it. The truth. Not fear of betrayal, fear of consequence. I didn't soften my voice. Then we deal with reality. The same way you expected me to. The test was ordered. This time, he didn't smile. The days that followed were unbearable. Not with tension, but with honesty. He was distant, but not cold. Thoughtful. Watching. The roles had reversed. When the results arrived, neither of us reached for the envelope at first. He did eventually. His hands shook. Just a little. He opened it. Read it. Didn't smile. He swallowed. Looked at me. She's mine, he said quietly. I nodded. I know. That was the moment the truth finally landed. Not about paternity. About trust. He tried to apologize. The words came out clumsy, heavy with regret. He said he'd been afraid. That he didn't know why the doubt took hold. That he'd never meant to hurt anyone. I listened. All of it. Then I told him something he hadn't considered. You didn't need a test to hurt us, I said. You already did. The room felt empty after that. Not angry. Just finished. Because some things can't be unlearned. And some proofs arrived too late to matter. After the second envelope was opened and set aside, the house didn't return to normal. It didn't collapse either. It just changed. Quietly. Like furniture rearranged in the dark. Everything's still there, but nothing in quite the same place. We didn't separate immediately. Life rarely makes room for clean breaks. There were school mornings to manage, dinners to cook, children who still needed rides and reassurance, and bedtime routines. The practical parts of our life kept moving, even while the emotional center shifted. He tried harder. That was obvious. More patience with our daughter. More presence. He volunteered for things he used to avoid. Helped with homework. Read bedtime stories again. She noticed. Children always do. But there was a difference now. Something careful in him. Like he was afraid to touch the wrong place. I noticed it too. Trust doesn't shatter loudly. It erodes. And once it does, even sincere effort feels delayed. Like rain after a fire. We talked. Not constantly. Not dramatically. Real conversations. The kind where you sit with long pauses and let uncomfortable truths breathe. He admitted the doubt hadn't come from anything I'd done. It came from him. From stories. From insecurity he never examined because it was easier to externalize it. That didn't make it better. But it made it clearer. I told him how alone I'd felt. How humiliated. How watching him withdraw from our daughter had frightened me more than the accusation itself. I told him that trust isn't something you can put on hold without consequences. He listened. Truly listened. And for the first time in a long while, I believed he understood. But understanding isn't the same as repair. Some nights, lying next to him, I felt the absence more than the presence. The version of us I'd believed in was gone. In its place was something quieter. More cautious. Less certain. I grieved that. Privately. There were moments of normalcy. Laughter. Shared memories. Reminders of why we'd chosen each other in the first place. Those moments mattered, but they didn't erase what had happened. I started rebuilding myself in small ways. Taking time alone. Reconnecting with parts of me that existed before marriage, before motherhood. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I needed to know I could stand independently if I had to. Strength, I learned, isn't loud. It's prepared. Eventually, we reached a truth neither of us could avoid. Love can survive many things. But trust, once questioned so deeply, requires more than effort. It requires transformation. And transformation isn't guaranteed. We chose counseling. We chose honesty. We chose to stop pretending things would just go back to normal. Some days felt hopeful. Others felt heavy. What we lost was innocence. What changed was power. What remained was responsibility, to our children, and to ourselves. Looking back now, I wonder if I'd do it the same way again. What about you? Was the pain necessary to become who you are today? Let me know below. I don't regret standing my ground. I don't regret insisting on fairness. I regret that I had to. But regret isn't the same as weakness. By the time the dust settled, I wasn't the same woman who'd agreed to the first test without hesitation. I was steadier. More aware. Less willing to trade my peace for someone else's certainty. Whatever happened next, together or apart, I knew one thing for sure. I would never allow doubt to define my worth again. I used to think love was about endurance. About staying, even when things got uncomfortable. About proving loyalty by how much you were willing to absorb. I don't think that anymore. What I learned is simpler, and harder. Love without trust isn't love. It's management. It's constant adjustment to someone else's fear. And if you accept that long enough, you start shrinking without realizing it. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I tell it because I know how easy it is to normalize doubt when it comes wrapped in logic. To accept disrespect when it's disguised as caution. To stay quiet because speaking up feels like it might cost you everything. Sometimes, staying quiet costs more. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, if you've ever been asked to prove your innocence instead of being trusted, please hear this. You don't owe anyone certainty at the expense of your dignity. Trust is either mutual, or it's conditional. And conditional trust is just control with better branding. So here's my final question. Is it better to forgive and move on, or to make sure they understand exactly what they lost? There's no wrong answer. Drop it in the comments. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Emily Parker's voice travels. The hardest lessons don't make you louder, they make you clearer.